Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin. Welcome back. We have two great guests this evening, Newt Gingrich and Representative Jason Smith. But before we get to them, we are in the middle of the greatest effort at a one-party power grab, maybe in the entire Western world, but certainly in the history of the United States. The Democrat Party is trying to make sure they can never lose elections. This is what they've done in California, New York, and Illinois. It's spreading throughout other states, Virginia, and so forth. But they want to do it at a national level. And the President of the United States and the Republican Party is pushing back. Well, at least some of the Republican Party is pushing back. And the Democrat Party has become an umbrella group for all of these radical leftist organizations. Marxists, Islamists, other radical leftists, even foreign money pouring into this country. And I want to connect all the dots for you this evening. But let's start with this notion that voter ID is somehow racist. It's Jim Crow. Now, the Democrat Party is responsible for Jim Crow in the 50s and 60s. What was Jim Crow? Jim Crow put barriers in front of people to vote, like poll taxes, like literacy tests, threats, and so forth and so on. And the Democrats want you to believe that the presentation of a driver's license or other evidence of citizenship is just like when they were operating the polls in the 50s and 60s and trying to prevent blacks from voting. It is sick, but the media run with it. I even saw an article in USA Today in which they said, not only that, but it's going to limit the ability of married women to vote. And I said, where's that coming from? But let's take a look at this. You need a driver's license or some evidence of age or even citizenship to buy alcohol, cigarettes, opening bank accounts, food stamps, welfare benefits, Medicaid, Social Security applications, all federal government, unemployment compensation, to get a job, a mortgage, a lease, to drive, buy, or rent a car, hat tip, Washington Examiner, airport security, TSA, marriage licenses, to buy a gun, to adopt a pet, to get a hotel room, hunting licenses, fishing licenses, buying a cell phone. Anybody have a cell phone out there? Gambling at a casino to make sure you're of age, to pick up a prescription, blood donations, purchasing certain cold medicines over the counter, nail polish at CVS, and I put entering any government building, like the Capitol building, where the Democrats are, saying you shouldn't need a requirement to show an ID just to vote, but you must show one in order to meet us in the Capitol building. Also the White House, of course, the Supreme Court, all federal courts. If you want to enter the DNC, the RNC, you need an ID. You want to go to a political convention, you need an ID. You want to enter most businesses in this country, including media corporation buildings, you need an ID. And to accept packages from overnight express services and the post offices, you need an ID. But to vote, it's Jim Crow. Anybody really believe this BS? No, they don't. The American voter, according to Pew Research, support voter ID 83%. Those who oppose it, 16%. I'm guessing most of them are illegal aliens and congressional Democrats. But Democrats, as a group, support voter ID 71%. Republicans, 95%. Let's be clear and succinct and use our noggins. The only reason not to support voter ID is because you want fraud. There is no other explanation. None. Because you want people who aren't supposed to vote to vote. You want people who aren't supposed to vote twice to vote twice. You want people to vote in the name of dead people. You want voter rolls that are not accurate. This is what the Democrat Party wants. This is what they're working toward, one-party rule. The more, barriers you have to fraud, well, the less chance they have to win. And then after an election, when you say, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right, we need a recount or we want to send new electors, oh, you're an election denier. We're on to this now. We, the American people, we're on to this. The vast majority of countries throughout the world, they require the presentation of identification before casting a ballot. And research indicates that nearly all developed nations and most developing ones have some form of voter ID. In fact, it's a widespread requirement. As of a few years ago, photo ID as part of voter ID was required in 176 countries or jurisdictions. We have 193 countries. So the vast majority of countries, even the majority black countries, require an ID. Developed nations like ours, I think, 38 are members of the OECD member countries. 36 require voter IDs. Which two do not? As a national requirement, the United States and New Zealand. Wow. What about our states? We actually have states that don't require any documentation to vote, including Washington, D.C., a non-state, and the vast majority are Democrat states. California, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Nevada, a purple state, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Pennsylvania, a toss-up state, and Vermont. So the vast majority of states that don't require it are Democrat states. Now, what about these countries? Take a look. Countries of all backgrounds, of all types, third world, advanced countries, wherever they are, they require voter ID. And some of them are majority black. We even have South Africa here and Haiti here and so forth and so on. So why are we playing these games? Because the Democrat Party puts party before country. I hate to say it, that's what communist parties do. You need to be the general secretary of the Communist Party to actually control a communist country. Well, they want something akin to that in this nation, where the Democrat Party has one-party rule, and the party is the state. California again, New York again, Illinois again, and some of these other states. One-party rule again. This is the biggest power grab in the history of America. But it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop there. Immigration. Yes, they want to replace citizens with non-citizens and create new citizens, not for the benefit of the country, certainly not for the benefit of we, the people, for the benefit of the Democrat Party. Their goal is not to have to rely on persuasion and convincing people to vote for them. Just change the people that vote for them. And of course, the Islamists are happy to vote for the Democrats because they know they're weak, like the Labor parties and the liberal parties in Europe. So they have an overlapping interest in that. And that's what's taking place. So the Democrats had the borders wide open. 25 million illegal aliens came in. And if they didn't want to come in, they sent planes for them, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them. And there wasn't any serious vetting. And they plowed through our immigration laws, destroying most of them, redefining them, rewriting them, utterly lawless and contemptible in violation of the federal Constitution. But they did it anyway. And now they'll do anything to protect what they hope will be their new citizens, to protect them by destroying ICE and the Border Patrol. ICE and the Border Patrol, they're the big enemy now because they're the ones who have the responsibility under federal law to help deport people who aren't supposed to be here. And that's not just mass murders. That's not just people who commit additional crimes. That's people who aren't supposed to be here, who came here illegally. So the Democrats are demanding that in order to keep the government open, or at least part of it, that we have these 10 things that are done to ICE to make it absolutely impossible to deport illegal aliens. Here's their list. I just pulled it up. Targeted enforcement. DHS officers cannot enter private property without a judicial warrant. That's not the case now. You got to go to a court and get a warrant to go to the local 7-Eleven to round up illegal aliens. So in other words, they don't want illegal aliens rounded up, and they want to overwhelm these trial courts, which Congress has passed, Democrat and Republican, have refused to do. But we have a new Democrat Party now. Yes, it's really the Democratic Socialist Party. In my view, it's really an American Marxist party. But they need each other, as you'll see in a moment. So to get a judicial warrant to go on private property, Right now, under federal law, you don't need that. So that would come, if they came, that would stop basically deportations, almost, period. No masks. Prohibit ICE and immigrant enforcement agents from wearing masks and other face coverings. So to expose them. Why? So they can be targeted by the violent rioters. To expose them and their family and their children when they go to school. Does that sound like the Democrat Party is actually looking out for you and me, Mr. and Mrs. America? Protecting law enforcement? No. They want to throw them to the rioters, throw them to the wolves. Required identification, required DHS officers conducting immigration enforcement to display their agency, their unique ID number, and their last name. Require them to verbalize their ID number and last name if asked. Again, to target them. To target them. The Democrat Party knows exactly what it's doing. It's all but destroyed our immigration system. It's thanks to Donald Trump that we still have one. So the border secured when they said it couldn't be secured for 1,000 different reasons, and they opened it. And now they're saying you can't deport the people that we let in here, we Democrats, illegally, because we need them for a lot of reasons. Most of all, not the country. The hell with the country. We need them to empower we, the Democrats, the Democrat Party. Number 4, protect sensitive locations. What? Prohibit funds from being used to conduct enforcement near sensitive locations. Medical facilities, school, child care facilities, churches, polling places, courts, long list. In other words, you're not allowed to go get illegal aliens. And even if you go get them on private property where we let you get them, you need a judicial warrant. That means no deportations, folks. That's pretty much where they are. No border, no deportations, no country. America's gone. But the Democrat Party will be stronger than ever, especially with birthright citizenship if the Supreme Court doesn't do the right thing. 25 million illegal aliens, all these kids that are born, they become American citizens, and who are they going to thank? Well, the Democrat Party assumes they'll thank them. No more Declaration of Independence and Constitution. We don't need all that stuff. We got our constituent groups, Islamists, illegal aliens, and ex-felons, and so are we Democrats. We know how to do this. We did it in California, in New York, in Illinois. Stop racial profiling. I was thinking, what does that mean? Prohibit DHS officers from conducting stops, questioning, and searching based on an individual's presence at certain locations, their job, their spoken language and accent, and their race or ethnicity. So you're going to have a zillion civil rights lawsuits against ICE because people will say, hey, they stopped me because of my language. They stopped me because of my color. They stopped me because I and others in a certain community, they went into a certain community. It's illegal. You can see all the barriers they're creating to deportations. 6, uphold use of force standards. Place into law a reasonable use of force policy, expanding training and require certification of officers. In the case of an incident, the officer must be removed from the field until an investigation is concluded. That's pretty much what's done now, but that's the only one. 7, ensure state and local coordination and oversight. But Democrat cities and states that claim sanctuary status in violation of the federal Constitution, now they're going to be the tail that wags the dog. Now they're going to call the shots. Preserve the ability of state and local jurisdictions to investigate and prosecute potential crimes and use of excessive force in certain incidents. So now local law enforcement at the direction of Democrat hack mayors, state law enforcement at the direction of Democrat hack attorneys general and governors will be able to investigate federal law enforcement, federal agencies, and prosecute them. That's not even federalism. That's crazy. Build safeguards into the system. Make clear that all buildings where people are detained must abide by the same basic detention standards that require immediate access to a person's attorney to prevent citizen arrest or detention. Right now, all illegal aliens don't have immediate access to attorneys. They can pay for attorneys. The goal is to put them in detention centers and remove them. So you can see barrier, 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 complication, complication, complication. 9, body cameras for accountability, not tracking. You can have body cameras, but only to hold an ICE agent or Border Patrol agent responsible, not to actually use them to track other people, see their faces, and hold them to account. Well, then what's the point, of course, other than to destroy law enforcement? And 10, no paramilitary police. I don't even know what the heck that means. That's the Democrat plan. Now, first of all, who is ICE? Well, I went and I looked. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement employees who are women. Almost 40% are women. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement executives who are women. Almost 30%. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement employees who are minorities. 45% are minorities, but almost 50% are Latinos altogether. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement executive who are minorities, 43%. And the most common minority, Latino. The most common foreign language that's used is Spanish. So these aren't white supremacists in robes. The minority is the majority for the most part. You can deport people right now, and they don't want you to, for a zillion reasons. Unlawful presence and entry into the United States, period. Visa violations, overstaying your visas. Fraud, like committing marriage fraud. Wink, wink, we know who that's about. False claims of citizenship. Criminal convictions of all kinds, even minor criminal convictions. National security threats, violations of human rights. Public charges, if you go on welfare. Wow, that's a lot of deportation. They don't want that, the Democrats. You change your address and lie about it. But I want to take the next few minutes to talk about the bigger picture that's included in this. The attack on ICE, the attack on national security, the attack is not spontaneous. The Network Contagion Research Institute has put out a report just the other day about these organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America. That would be Mondami, that would be AOC, that would be that entire group. That would be Bernie Sanders, and the foreign influence in that organization and other organizations, the direct and indirect funding and subsidies of these organizations, the indoctrination that takes place. They bring them into their country, specifically Venezuela, China, and Cuba. They indoctrinate them. They give them all kinds of foods, you know, like some people with Qatar. And then they send them back to the United States, they help them organize, and they use exactly the same propaganda, even the same slogans, as the countries urge them to use. This is a communist, fascist, Islamist, foreign movement in these front groups in America. And this report has chapter and verse of how they're doing it. And Fox Digital did a tremendous report on this, and you ought to read it. And it also includes organizations funded by Neville Roy Singham, an American-born tech tycoon and self-styled Marxist-Leninist, who's living in Shanghai. He has funded nonprofit groups, including the People's Forum, Code Pink, Breakthrough, BT Media, Answer Coalition, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which have worked closely with the Democratic Socialists of America in dispatching socialist, Marxist, Leninist, and communist foot soldiers into the streets to disrupt federal immigration law enforcement agents and stoke chaos. Stoke chaos between states, stoke chaos between states and the federal government, to undermine federal law enforcement, to keep the borders wide open, to end deportation. The demonstrations, the report finds, explicitly link domestic immigration enforcement to broader U.S. foreign policy actions. The Institute documents the chapters organized rallies using slogans such as "No ICE, no war," "ICE out for good," "Hands off Venezuela," framing ICE as an instrument of domestic state terror that mirrors U.S. imperialism abroad. I'll pursue this more deeply in the future, but doesn't it sound exactly like Hakeem Jeffries and Bernie Sanders and all the Democrats on TV at their press conferences? They're literally spewing the communist lines fed to these front organizations by Cuba, Venezuela, China, and other institutions. That's the modern Democrat Party. They will do anything. They will say anything. They will organize with anybody, in order to take over power. And they're doing a revolution through immigration. We'll be right back.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.